And welcome to our webinar today. I am Sean Eubanks, CEO of Renaissance Consulting, and our webinar is titled today, How to Raise Capital for Your Cannabis Business. The information I'm sharing with you today has been used to raise millions of dollars using this exact document that I'm going to be presenting to you for our clients. So why are we here? The cannabis industry is the fastest growing industry in the world. You can invest in a myriad of ways, including touching the plant or ancillary businesses. So clients reach out to us with no shortage of ideas, but mostly they need funding. And so that's what we're going to learn today about in today's webinar. The time is now, guys. Marijuana is legal for medical purposes in 29 states. 29 states and Washington, D.C. allow for medical marijuana for different purposes, although their approaches can significantly differ. Some allow medical marijuana dispensaries and home cultivation. Others only allow home cultivation. A few allow dispensaries, but not home cultivation. So give us a call to discuss your specific state, but most importantly, let's talk about the local municipality you plan to operate in, because that's what you'll want to address going in the beginning there. At least 12 states are poised to consider medical marijuana legalization this year in 2018, with more possibly joining as legislative sessions continue. So 2018 could be a pivotal year in the burgeoning bud movement. Some states are even preparing to take unprecedented legislative steps to make marijuana, either recreational or medical, legal and more easily accessible. A quick word from our sponsor, Renaissance Consulting. We write the most comprehensive business plans in the cannabis industry. We've consulted in 14 states and Puerto Rico. We have a combined 300 applications submitted across the country, so please reach out to us. We're also proud to provide a list of references for you. Currently, we're working with 32 cannabis companies throughout Colorado with everything from cultivation support, construction improvements, construction new builds, all the way through compliance audits as well. Services we offer are relevant to today's presentation. We do entity formation for you. We do cannabis-specific business plans. We do capital raising sourcing and assistance. We also will file the application for a cannabis license in your state, so we'll write that application for you turnkey. All right, so cannabis business plan basics. So who should use it? New cannabis companies should use it. Existing cannabis companies needing funding, or if you anticipate future needs or those who are wanting to expand, can all benefit from the use of a business plan. What is it used for? Number one, it shows your investors you're professional and serious. It is your skin in the game. It does cost something to have this prepared, and your investors will appreciate that you have invested up front to get that done. With a business plan, you'll also use it. It's much easier to raise capital, and you don't have to keep reselling your deals to your investor. This is very important. Once the investors have seen these numbers up front, they'll understand the vision of it, and you don't have to keep reselling them throughout the process. All right, so cannabis business plan. So this is how to present this. There are three phases. Number one is what I call the coffee table version, where it's a beautiful presentation that we will send to you, and you'll have it, you can put it on a coffee table. The second version of that is a pitch book, where we're basically condensing information down to present specifically to your investor. And then we have a customized and restructuring of it after the investor feedback. So how this normally works is we'll have phone calls with your investor, and they'll say, this is how I want it to be structured, and we'll go back and restructure the numbers and set it up to where it's at the level they want to participate in. So this is sort of a living document, three different phases. You get the coffee table version, you get the pitch book that your investors will have, and then you get a customized version of it after that. So it's a process that usually takes several months to develop once the original version of the business plan is given to you. So cannabis business plan, how to use it. You want to have it written and given to you, but the real magic is in having the conference calls and presentations that come with it. It should be a living document that can be amended. Avoid someone just sending you a fixed business plan who's not willing to assist you in the capital raising. Remember, the point of a business plan is to raise capital. All right, so how long should it be? Most common, I'll see in the industry here, business pages around 30 pages. It certainly can be accomplished in 15. Brevity is a benefit here. The case for 30 is that most have no clue about cannabis and can appreciate the history and overview of a national and then statewide and then the local potential. So there is a case for having a 30-page business plan, and so we understand both, but what you want, the meat of it, can be accomplished in 15 pages. Even if you can't afford it in the beginning, it paints a beautiful picture of the potential of the opportunity and the growth, the potential for growth. So remember, 280E is still in effect. So whenever possible, we're going to recommend that the business plan be written in a vertically integrated model. So even if you're not going to use that full vertically integrated model in the beginning, maybe you're just going to be at the retail level, or you just want to cultivate, or maybe you're at the processing level, or testing, or a different type of facility. We want to generate this business plan for you, and most importantly for your investors to see the entire picture. All right, so the business plan, this document summarizes the potential business opportunity and provides proposed scenarios and recommended next steps towards gaining appropriate licenses. So the executive summary is the first thing you're going to have in this business plan. You're going to have the background first, which is what do you want to accomplish? You're going to talk about this at length. What is the point of being in the business, and what's your focus there? You also want to talk about in the executive summary, you want to talk about what is the size of the market that you're leveraging. And then you have a starting point as well that you're going to mention in this executive summary, which is, are you buying an existing cannabis business, or are you starting your own? You just want to clarify this during the executive summary. Next up is the financial analysis and proposed business model. And then we're going to talk about the approach taken. So whose experience are you relying on? In most cases, you're going to be working with a consultant like Renaissance Consulting. And so you can have us as our kind of parlay our operating experience, have that mentioned in the business plan. And then we'll talk about your experience and your team's experience in your other industries. All right, so what really matters is, after the approach taken, this is what really matters. This is the funding, distribution of profits, total capital invested needed, predict cash flows and tax revenues at this point. If an investor were to skip over all these things, this is the part where they would dive right into, and this is the part where they might start. Depending how patient they are with it, they might want to read everything, but this is where we're really getting into the sort of the meat and potatoes of it. Funding, distribution of profits, total capital investment needed, and then you're going to predict cash flow and tax revenues here. All right, so then the final chapter of the executive summary here is we're going to talk about recommendations. So is this multiple phases that we're wanting to do? Are we going to start with cultivation and then go into manufacturing, processing, maybe distribution, then onto the retail side? Are there other layers involved with that? And the next part is going to be next steps, where we're going to convey deadlines, informing state and local regulatory bodies of the intent to purchase, and then we're also going to show significant progress. So all of this kind of breaks down into a lot of different things. Conveying deadlines is going to talk about the state deadlines, the local deadlines, what the municipalities are going to allow, and how. Why is this urgent? Why are we going to need capital at this point? Why are we needing it at various stages? And we're going to kind of explain that, and that's going to be deadline driven. And then we're going to be informing the state and local regulatory bodies of the intent to purchase. You can certainly rent facilities, but as you'll see in these business plans, purchasing the property has an advantage. If we're going to rent the facility, we want to make sure that we're on a 10-year lease or longer, when you have options after that are very, very friendly to us. And then you're going to finally want to show significant progress, meaning that you're going to go for the application first, get the license, and you're going to do design and build out, which is the construction phase that starts. And you're going to need to show progress in the construction phase and convey that to the investor to finally know when you're actually going to open up. All right, so then the next topic on the business plan, after we handle the executive summary, we're going to talk about the industry overview. So it's another landmark year for the legal cannabis market. You're going to talk about your understanding of national sales numbers here. You can source ArcView or BDS Analytics to get some of that historical data that they put together if you're looking to cite national sales numbers at this point. And then 29 states allow for medical cannabis, and 9 of them, including District of Columbia, allow for adult use at this point. And then you have your projections. You talk about how many more states are going to come online in this year, particularly in 2018 is where we are right now. So you'll want to talk about how many different states are going to come on and what the potential for that is. All right, so the next up is understanding the opportunity. We're going to talk about a joint venture here, how that partnership's going to work. This is a very fluid part of the business plan because your investor can come back and ask for specific things that they need and a specific structure. So we might have that worked into that. Next up, under understanding the opportunity, after we talk about the joint venture, how that partnership's going to work, you'll talk about the purpose of the license. Are you going for cultivation, manufacturing, distribution, retail, looking at testing? testing, maybe that's desirable or profitable. So it depends on where you're at and what state you're working in, and where how that's going to be profitable. And so how you'll put this into the business plan and explain that, have your rhyme and reason for the investor on that. After that, you're going to talk about the product set. So are you going to does your state allow for flower, trim, extracts, concentrates? What products do you actually want to sell? And then that's going to allow you to back in. So I do recommend people start from the retail level, understanding your local market and what do you want people to purchase. And so then we can talk about, these are the products that are being purchased, and this is the future of the market. This is our assessment here and where that information's coming from, where that assessment comes from. And then you can sort of back into that all the way into the type of extraction that you want to end up getting the type of products that you ultimately want to sell to your retail customers. Next up, under the understanding of the opportunity, you're going to talk about ownership and management here. So is this new? Is it buying an existing business? Transfer of ownership, renewal certificate needed, things like that. And then you're going to talk about funding after that. So funding, you're going to have the amount that you need, the structure of it, the terms, use, and then the ROI outline. Under support requested is you're going to have the operational expertise provided by Renaissance Consulting. All right, so next up, you're going to have state and local jurisdiction factors. So do they mirror each other, or are they different? Remember, it's all about your local municipality first. I know people tend to focus on the state license. That is very important. We're ultimately going to get a state license, but what is happening at the local level is where a consultant can help you have the advantage there. You can have properties that are made available in the green zone, but you don't necessarily have friendly landlords or people that want to participate in the cannabis industry. So you need to have a consultant that has those eyes on the ground there that can do that for you. So first focus is going to be on the local jurisdiction, and if there are any differences between what the local jurisdiction is asking for and what the state license calls for. You want to know about the limits, and mention the limits here of cultivation, production, or laboratory licenses. Each municipality is going to have a limit. It is common for them to just have an unlimited amount of numbers and then all of a sudden make an announcement that says, hey, we're no longer accepting applications anymore, we've cut this off, we've received enough. They'll do that through press releases and other things. One of the big questions I get from clients is, how long do we have? How long do we have to go ahead and file this application? I don't see any deadlines in place, and I just want to tell the stories of those local municipalities and our experience across the country, that they can just basically announce a cutoff anytime they want to do that. We're experiencing that right now in the state of Massachusetts, as you have, they've stated they're going to allow for licenses to continue, but again, each local municipality can say no. We recently dealt with that in Michigan, where we were surprised. We had a client in Detroit surprised about the memorandum that was moratorium that was actually renewed there on a 6-month basis, and so that was a surprise to us because we were ready to move into that. So paying attention to what's happening on the local jurisdiction, very important. At this point, you want to mention limits to cultivation. To the investor now, because that's the topic of this webinar, the investor is actually interested in the limitations there, meaning how much market share potential can they have, because if there's going to be a limited amount of licenses granted there, then they know that they have an advantage. You're going to talk about moratoriums in place, potential. You want to talk about the history of that, briefly have that mentioned for your specific municipality that you're going for. And then if there are moratoriums, the time frame to be lifted are important. Provisional licenses are accepted. Remember, that's a pre-licensing process versus your permanent license. You just want to mention that. Is there a state-required point of sale system and seed to tracking system? Yes, there is. Most of the time this is announced up front, so we're going to mention what the state software, what contract has been granted, and then how your point of sale is going to interface with that, and making sure that they talk way. And next up is their reciprocity. So are you allowed to accept medical cards across other states? Nevada comes to mind there as one. So you want to mention that. That will be helpful to the investor to let them know that. At this point, so state and local jurisdiction factors, in addition to reciprocity, for a state like Massachusetts, I want to mention the other markets around there, like New York, that's actually struggling. And so we know in the Berkshires area, the western state part of Massachusetts, where we have clients compliance there, that they're actually going to move, they're going to come across the border, they're going to get a lot of interstate traffic. So that's important. We want to note that. We want to also make some predictions, if we can, about what's going to happen. You know, in the foreseeable future, 2 years or so, we anticipate that New York will get its act together and be a competitor eventually. We also know that New Jersey is going to be offering recreational cannabis very soon. So you want to mention those factors as well. All right, and then you want to talk about licensing, what is the current snapshot of the actually existing market. So you want to talk about how many licenses are currently issued, how many provisional versus final. Nevada is a state that jumps out to me, as a lot of provisional licenses have been issued, but a staggering amount of people, the majority of people, did not move forward with their licenses in Nevada. And I don't know if that's a buy and hold strategy. We've certainly seen that in Florida, where people, and we ran into it in Pennsylvania as well, where people were trying to sell the license before we even got news that we'd won there. So that sort of sub-market is developing, where people are wanting to get their license and go ahead and flip it, and they can make a lot of money doing that. So on this licensing part of the tab here, you're going to have how many cultivation facilities they have in there, how many production facilities they have. For those of you that are looking at the screen here, you can see 412 cultivation facilities, production facilities are 47, dispensaries are 200, independent testing labs are 17. This is just numbers taken from a state we're working in. All right, next up we're going to address program regulation. And so we're going to identify and address the state regulatory body at this point. For example, in the state of Colorado, it's a marijuana enforcement division, which is a subset of the Department of Revenue there. If you're on the hemp side of things, maybe you're dealing with the Department of Agriculture or things like that. So you just want to identify and address a regulatory body and signal to your investors at this point that you know who you're going to be submitting to. You also want to mention if you have any relationships with lobbyists and things like that that are going to sort of help you get across the finish line. These are important compensating factors that investors want to hear about. You want to identify and address each local municipality. So one of the things that we might do is say, listen, this is our targeted area. This is the area we want to be in the state, but here are 3 other jurisdictions and municipalities that are going to open up in the future, and we might shift to those. So in other words, as we're getting the funds together and we're getting ready to submit the application, if something changes, moratorium happens or something like that, here's plan B, C, and D. Investors appreciate that. Next up, you're going to discuss permissible use. This is important to an investor because they want to know what type of ailments are included in the program. Some of the more common ailments are cancer, glaucoma, PTSD, wasting away, which is malnutrition from chronic diseases. You'll see that in cancer. Persistent muscle spasms, seizures, severe nausea. Severe pain is important. So when we see chronic pain, we're bullish on that. We would explain to the investors at this point, listen, chronic pain is a good one. That's where you have a massive jump in the application for medical cards because chronic pain is something where the patient goes in and says, I have chronic pain, and it's very hard to pinpoint and diagnose. PTSD is another one that is not only common for our soldiers that are returning from war, but people who have traumatic events in their life are now being diagnosed with PTSD and using cannabis to help with that. So permissible use, this point is telling what conditions are approved in the state to be used. All right, then permissible products. We want to talk about this. Are all forms of smokable cannabis allowed? For example, in the state of Florida, we're dealing with a situation there where flower is not allowed. They're suing for that and they're trying to push for that, but that's a big deal because it's still 60% of your revenue, and you want to make sure you're noting that that's not allowed here. Edibles and extracts, what type of extracts are allowed and what types of products are going to be allowed. That's very, very important. You also want to talk about, under this section, you want to talk about current sales limits. And for example, maybe there's 2.5 ounces of usable cannabis in any one 14-day period, or there's a maximum allowed quantity of edible cannabis products and marijuana infused products that are established. That's pretty simple, pretty straightforward, and you can find that information easily. Or maybe there hasn't been a limit determined yet. You just want to address this, and you don't want to skip over it. Make sure the investors know that you've thought about this, and there's any potential or any legislation you're aware of that's being put out there, presented, or tossed around that would either remove some restrictions from you or allow for different products to be sold there. Territories, an overview of how the territories are set up. You want to talk about that. Is everything broken up geographically and how that works, and then more specifically your municipal map as well. So county, district, city, population. All right, the window of opportunity is what you want to discuss next. So this is when are the applications available? when are the applications due, and what other factors will play into the window of opportunity. And then you want to talk about the application overview next, which is the basis of license award. Is it awarded on a point system? Is it merit based? What are indicators that you're going to win this license, and how are the awards, how a license is going to be awarded, and what makes your group stronger than most? So you want to talk about this and work that in. You want to talk about non-resident ownership. Is that allowed? One of the questions I get so often is, can we have foreign investment? So at that point, I'll have a conversation about source of funds with that client and talk about the requirements specific to that program. So when you're talking about source of funds, you might have heard this in real estate before, where you have to have seasoning of funds. Basically, essentially, is you have to have it in your account so long and prove where you got it, things like that. But most situations, I'm allowed to work. I'm able to work around foreign investment without bending any rules or getting into any gray area whatsoever. So then you want to talk about license duration and renewal here. So do we know how long they're valid for, and will it be a renewal process? There are renewal processes in every single state. Usually this is on an annual basis, and the cost of the renewal sometimes is very expensive, but again, that's coming from revenue from the existing business. So you want to convey to the investor that you know that that's an expense that you're going to have, but that you're not going to ask that investor to pay that for you. That's going to come out of revenue from the business. Then you want to discuss taxes next in this. You want to say, what are the city and state taxes as they relate to wholesale and retail, and also what are the flexibility there? So you might have a chamber of commerce that says we're going to have a 4% excise tax, but we can increase that up to 6% within the next 2 years. So what we'll do is we'll plug that higher rate into the taxes, and then we'll work backwards from there. Then you want to talk about political factors here. So it's a harsh reality that you need to be politically connected. You should be politically connected. You should be working with a consultant who's politically connected, or at least has a government affairs team. So it's very, very important. You want to make sure that you're going into areas that you can win in. And so one of the things I think we do really well at Renaissance Consulting is identifying different areas where you can be the most competitive. And that's where the value of a consultant will come in. You want to talk about community outreach here. Just a general overview for community outreach: do more than you think you should. All right, next up we're going to talk about the market size. So you want to talk about the medical cannabis market. For example, the 2017 medical market in Colorado was $300 million. The 2018 medical market estimated at $305 million. If you've been following numbers in the state of Colorado, which is a recreational state, this is very, very common. We saw it took us about 3.5 years to balance out between medical and recreational cannabis, where people are able to sort of find what they wanted on the recreational side, so there's less of an incentive for them to renew their medical card. So what you'll see, traditional numbers, typical numbers, you'll see a massive increase of what's happening. We actually had a pullback on the medical side of things last year, $1.5 billion in revenue in total in the small state of Colorado, whereas only $300 million of that was medical sales. So you want to talk about that. You also want to talk about the broader medical market share and your estimations of that and how that's going to affect your investor. Next up, you want to talk about your potential cannabis customer base here. So you've got the medical cannabis market as a whole. You got your current patient count. For example, in the state of Michigan, you had more than 252,000 registered medical patients. That's a great start. That's a proven market there. And so as they transition into recreational now, you're going to have that ready-made base of 250,000 people there. So you want to talk about that. You also want to talk about potential demand, and you want to talk about the low resident to patient ratios, or how that's going to affect you there. Typically, you want to stay around, if you're starting in a brand new state, you want to stay around 5%. You don't want to anticipate that any more than 5% of the total population is going to go out and get a medical card. Big difference between getting people to get out of the shadows and go in and actually purchase a medical card. Different states have restrictions. Some doctors are flat out unfriendly, they're uneducated, or they're disinterested at all in the cannabis industry. So there are a lot of things that make this progress really, really slow. So just make sure, I think a telltale sign I see, a lot of people will send me a business plan, they'll ask me to sort of rework numbers and point out what I see is wrong, and that's one of the main things I see wrong, is people just projecting too high of a number. You've got 20-30% of the population. That's absolutely not realistic. There's no historical data to support that either. All right, so then you want to talk about non-resident requirements. So are people able to come across the border, the border from another state and purchase in your in your state, or they need to, do they need to get a medical card first? How does that work? And so this all speaks to their potential to be a customer. And you want to consider the source on this of any sort of outside companies that you use. We love ArcView, we love BDS Analytics, Frontier. New Frontier is awesome as well. Really, really good companies out in the cannabis space that you can look at and get reliable data from. It's expensive, but you can get it. It's worth it to know that. Okay, so next up, after we finish that as a part of the business plan, we talk about our analysis, which is the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Renaissance Consulting uses a SWOT analysis to further vet the opportunity. It's a structured planning method that evaluates 4 elements of the business venture. And then next up, we're going to dive into the financial analysis part. So we utilize the financial analysis tool to provide revenue forecast, ROI, tax generation, etc. So this is a 3-year pro forma that we'll include in this as well. We think 3 years is good, and then we're looking at existing businesses of purchasing or acquiring or even investing in. We'll go back, we'll do historical data for that. So in the financial analysis, you want to have, again, you're going to discuss forecast, ROI, tax generation. So you'll have cash flow, you have for the grow and the retail, you have cumulative cash flow, combined cumulative cash flow, cumulative discounted cash flow projections. Then we'll follow that up with recommended next steps. We use this section to make recommendations about whether or not the client should proceed with their application, and if so, what format. A quick word on the financial analysis, guys. You want to make this we do this, we're able to accomplish this in just a couple of pages, and the way that we break it down is through sources and uses. We're going to talk about what the actual capital is going to be used and the time frame of that. So we're really doing an explanation on these financial numbers. We're not just throwing numbers at people. We want to have a logical order for that and explain it and take that investor all the way through the process. Here's the capital that we need, and here's what we're using it for, and then here's where we need phase 2, phase 3, and phase 4. And so we're kind of walking them through those steps, and we're getting their plan. They're getting that plan in place, because when we sign these documents with the investor, we're asking for their commitment at those levels. So those are very, very important, because remember, we're working with state deadlines, local municipality deadlines, all those things. So in a recommendation and next steps, we're talking about, are we going to proceed with this application? Do we think the group is strong enough? And do we think that we could do it with phase 1 in capital? And we want to talk about, are there any suggestions that we make? Are there any changes at this point? So maybe we look at this and we say, listen, we originally had this team of 5 people. We added this person for their pharmaceutical experience. We added this operator. We added this master grower. We sort of started to fill their team out. And so we actually make recommendations to build for their team. There are some cases where we say, no, this is actually great. We'll just add ourselves, Renaissance Consulting, as the operator, and then have that application ready to go. So sometimes majority of the groups are strong enough to stand on their own. They just need cannabis operational experience to sort of be the icing on the cake for their application. All right, so we do kind of go through the SWOT analysis further, and then we talk about what recommendations are we going to give out. So in this case, are we talking about an absentee owner? Are we making a recommendation that they sign a 2-year operational contract, or maybe a 5-year contract, or maybe a custom compliance audited situation where they have a consultant come in and just audit each week for the first couple of years to make sure everything is in compliance. So there are multiple ways to handle this. Sometimes we'll run into a team where we brought in the master grower, and we make that relationship, and that master grower becomes a partner in that business. And so as an operator, we're not necessarily needed at that point. Maybe they're sourcing nutrients through us or doing different things, but at that point they don't need our eyes there. Maybe they'll use us for legal and compliance and different reasons, or maybe as a check and balance on that master grower. So it depends really how strong your team is there. Under operational recommendations here, well, the next tab is expected outcomes. We're going to talk about that. So based on our recommendations, what do we think the operational and the financial outcomes are going to be? This is where we summarize the financial and operational predicted outcomes, especially if we've recommended anything different than was initially suggested by the client. All right, so the next step from there is going to be securing the real estate. So are the license requirements tied to a specific city which cannot be moved to another jurisdiction? This is interesting. In the very beginning, a couple of years ago, this wasn't a big deal at all, and it never really came up. Now it is. We recently ran into this in Ohio, where we were in a situation where the client wanted to move into another jurisdiction, and so that's becoming more and more common. So, and then next up, we want to talk about the current vacancy rate. So this is basically the real estate component that's a part of every cannabis deal, and you need a real estate specific cannabis team and people or a consultant that knows how to run and operate those real estate teams so that you can provide a check and balance for them. So we're going to talk about current vacancy rate. Does the property meet the needs of the opportunity as well as the state and local requirements? So what that means is the property could be perfect for the it's approved, but it doesn't meet our needs. It doesn't suit our growth plan. It's not big enough. It's not desirable enough, or there's some other reasons why it may not be a good property for us. Does the property meet the needs of the opportunity? We covered that. And can the property be leased or must it be purchased? So we're going to mention that. Increasingly, we're seeing more and more real estate investors that are moving into the space, and they're comfortable with this real estate type of deal. So a lot of times they're very comfortable owning that real estate, and so we want to make sure if we're in a situation where we need to lease it for a couple of years, that can work as well. All right, so the final thing on the real estate thing, we're going to take a quick break here in a second. So does it meet all the setback requirements for cannabis cultivation or production? So we want to make sure that is being addressed and make sure that you're in quote unquote the green zone. So guys, don't go away. We'll be right back. We're going to pause for a commercial break. We'll be right back. All right, welcome back from the break, guys. We were talking about securing real estate, and so you want to make sure that the full details of the purchase must be attached to the assessment and included in the financial projections. Very, very important there, guys. You want to know the deadlines and the time frame to prepare for, so you want to mention that here. This is the part where you want to state whether your consultant has had success in competitive markets. So we need to mention Renaissance Consulting. This is going to be helping us with the application, and this is why we've chosen them. And so you want to kind of allow for a little bit of a bio, if you would, about the consulting company and why you feel like you're going to protect your investors' money by going with a consultant who's had success winning licenses. Next up, you want to engage Renaissance Consulting to manage the application process. There are a lot of YouTube videos that we have up on how to write your own application. We certainly can allow for that. In most cases, your investor is going to want to know that they're paying money to have the application writing be done by a professional, by a technical writer. So very important there. Also be prepared that your investor is going to ask you to pay for the application process. They normally will say, look, how much skin do you have in the game? They'll look at that you invested a small amount of money in the application process, and then once you win the license, they're going to come in and fund the deal. All right, guys, that concludes our part of the webinar. Just as a quick reminder, with Renaissance Consulting, you're going to get everything from understanding cannabis basics to state regulations, how much money you need and how to obtain it. You're going to learn how to become a legal entity, write a business plan, create robust financial statements. We do construction and build out, of course. We write SOPs. We handle security systems, inventory audits, cultivation, extraction, and retail best practices, testing products, point of sale inventory management systems, packaging and labeling, transportation and chain of custody. We do marketing and branding and social media, very, very important there. Interactions with government agencies, I mentioned about government affairs team, which is very important. And you want to minimize the negative impact on your community. We talked about community involvement plan there. And so with us, under a basic package, you would get the application submitted, you would get investment assistance, you would get location with identification and acquisition of the property, you would get construction and build out project management, you get a full suite of standard operating procedures. We'd come in and train your employees as well. You get marketing and branding help, hiring and training, and you get preferred vendor lists. A lot of people will call us just to negotiate their wholesale contracts, which is very, very important. Understanding that again, if you're on the retail level, you're going to be purchasing wholesale. If you're on the wholesale level, you need to find a place for your product. So you're negotiating on either side of those, and often you'll have a distribution channel in the middle that will need to be addressed, collecting excise tax and different things about the process and delays associated with that. You're also going to have issues with recall eventually, and you want to make sure that those are properly stated and negotiated in your contracts. All right, so question and answering period. I've got a couple of questions from the webinar side of things. Wish I would have found you sooner. Can you tell me what is wrong with the numbers I have so far? Well, thank you for the compliment there. Can you tell me what is wrong with the numbers I have so far? We could look at an existing business plan for you, certainly. I have people send that over to me. I've had people send it over to evaluate the acquisition of a company, and that's a lot of fun. I like looking at those things for sure. The problem I run into is I end up having to scrap all of those numbers. If I see a couple of numbers that are off, it screws everything up on the pro formas, and so if I'm going to put my stamp on it and say, yeah, I've looked at this, or they've had a consulting company look at this, and we approve of these numbers, then they need to be accurate and defendable. So in most cases, unfortunately, I end up scrapping the existing business plan or saying, look, let me, let's get on the phone and figure this out and figure out a way to do it. So unfortunately, there are a lot of really cheap business plans out there that are template form, but don't necessarily get you to the numbers that you want. So yes and no on that. I hope that answers your question. Next question is, will you write a business plan for a provisioning center in Michigan? The answer is yes, I will. For those that are just listening, provisioning center is what they call dispensaries in Michigan. So yes, I will write a business plan for a provisioning center. I do, like I stated earlier in the presentation, I do like to have a vertically integrated model, but I will create a retail provisioning center for you only. That's very important that those actual numbers be actually right and defendable, because you're susceptible to 280E, which is the tax code. Remember, on the retail side of things, you're selling marijuana, and when you're selling marijuana is when you're taxed the most. You're about a 60 to 65% effective tax rate on that, depending how aggressive your CPA is. So yes, I will do that, but I would say that it's more important to hire a professional to do a business plan for a provisioning center than it is on the vertically integrated model. So if you have a vertically integrated model, you're able to shift things around and sort of delay or minimize your tax liability. And so those are very, very important things. And so if you make a small mistake on numbers, you can sort of make it up. But if you're off on the retail numbers on their own, you can really be in a bad way. And where I see people get in trouble with this is they're promising too much to the investor at the retail level. Yes, it's more affordable to get into a retail dispensary or provisioning center, in this case in Michigan, but you have a much less profit margin there. So much more affordable, less profit. So you want to balance that out and make sure you're not giving away too much to your investor at that point. Last question I'll take from you guys. What does it cost for a Massachusetts? For Massachusetts, for a Massachusetts business plan, is that the question? Or for a license, is that what you're asking for? Okay, so I don't have your response that quickly, but I will say for the Massachusetts, it depends on how strong your team is, right? So for the license, it depends on, do we need to fill out your team for you and make you introductions, help you get investors lined up? It depends on what we're doing for you on the application part of things. Do we need to find real estate for you? Have you found that already? In most cases, the answer is no. So applications are going to vary on Massachusetts. If you'll just reach out to me, and we will talk about what specific things you need for that application. And then on the business side of things, it can vary also depending on what you're looking for in Massachusetts. Are you wanting a vertically integrated model, or are you wanting just a retail level? So I'd have to know more information on that before I can give you cost for that. All right, guys, go ahead and reach out to us, 303-991-8154. You can find us on the web at startmyrenaissance.com. You can connect with me personally on LinkedIn as well. I'm Sean Eubanks, the CEO of Renaissance Consulting. You can reach out to us by email, info@consultingrenaissance.com. I hope this has been an enjoyable webinar for you on how to raise capital, and I hope it's been great information for you. I'm happy to continue the conversations. Please look through our other YouTube videos here, and hopefully that helps you get a step closer into starting your cannabis business. So until next time, we'll see you again.